But I want to thank everybody for taking time tonight to be here, not only for the back to school night, but to stick around for this meeting, this presentation. I want to share with you some things that we've been working on over the course of the summer, and I'm hoping to make some changes culturally within our community, a school community, that is going to help our children to thrive. Oh, I have to be by the podium. Let's begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Let's pray together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. So the title of my presentation tonight is Taking Back Healthy Childhood, Pushing Back Against the Digital Rewiring of Childhood that is Hurting and Weakening Our Children. It's written over the backdrop of a group of individuals that some of you of a certain age will probably recognize. One of the greatest movies in American history, Sandlot. Those boys had a ball that summer, and it was an iconic movie that in so many ways represented childhood in America in so many of the good ways. And so that was what I wanted in the back of our minds as we get started tonight. This book, I read it for the first time when it came out. I think it was in March or April. And when I read it, it's a book by Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. I knew that what was in this book needed to be shared as widely as possible with as many parents as I can get in front of. And so I stood up in front of the choir concert, and I invited anybody that wanted to be part of it, to be part of a book study over the course of the summer on this book. And I was very grateful and encouraged by the response that I got, which was about 60 of our parents decided to sign up to get a free copy of the book and to try to make it to the meetings over the course of the summer. We met 4 times. There's 4 basic different sections of the book. And we had really wonderful, robust conversation about the content in here. We had about 40 people at every meeting. And at the end of the first meeting, I was planning for an hour-long conversation on it, and we went 2 hours plus because what we were discussing was that, I guess, meaningful and important for us as educators and parents. Jonathan Haidt is a name you might recognize. He wrote another book that has been pretty influential called The Coddling of the American Mind, about the American educational system. But this one in particular struck a nerve, and he has sold a tremendous amount of books, and there's a bit of a movement happening around this book for good reason. And so instead of sitting here and telling you in a way that's less persuasive and less precise about the book, I'm actually going to just play a short video. I think it's about 15 minutes of him summarizing what this book is about and showing you some data and whatnot so that we can then pick up from there.
On. And thank you, Ken and Jackie brought. Is Jackie here? There she is. Hello, Jackie. Ken and Jackie have supported my work at NYU Stern, and they've brought so many authors here to San Francisco. They're just great patrons of ideas, and so we're very grateful to you. Thank you. So a question for you. Tristan asked a bunch of questions about who we have in the audience. How many of you feel as though somehow things are spiraling out of control? You have a vague sense that things are getting weirder and weirder. Raise your hand. Okay. So you're right, they are. And if we go back to like 2011, 2012, when we were all such techno-optimists, at least most of us, you know, the internet had been so amazing, you know, godlike powers of knowledge in the 90s, and the fall of the Berlin Wall was just before that, so the internet was like, you know, the new age of democracy, and it's going to knock down all the dictators, it's going to be amazing. And then all the way to 2011, the Arab Spring. So most of us were techno-optimists. I certainly was. The future looked incredibly bright compared to millions of years of war and famine and things like that. And that's part of the reason why I think we missed what was happening to our kids, because we kind of thought, this is amazing, and the kids are immersing themselves in it. What could go wrong? And I'm starting this way because one of the first people to see that this wasn't what was going to happen was Tristan. First, when he was working at Google, and he gave this internal talk, this internal PowerPoint talk about, hey, you know, we're sucking up everybody's attention around the world, and what's going to happen if no one has any more attention to do anything? This is probably not a good thing. And that was 2013, and he's been ahead of, because he understands the complexity, not just of the technology, which a lot of people do, but Tristan is a really deep abstract thinker who is able to think about the complexity of society as a social scientist or sociologist would as well. So I'm really grateful to him. It's been really amazing for me to work with him on The Social Dilemma. We met before then. So I was very excited to get this invitation to speak with Tristan to you. What we're going to do first, though, is I think it's very helpful to lay out what has happened to young people, what has happened to people born after 1995. People born, let's say, 1997, on average, have a very different profile from people born, say, in 1993. It changed very, very suddenly. So I'm going to just go through a few slides. Now, I'm aware that my slides and graphs will be great for you here in the room, and they'll be great for those who are going to be watching the video that will be made, perhaps on YouTube, and not so good for the people listening on the podcast. So I'll try to sort of, you know, explain the overview of each slide without going into too much detail. But I want to start. Ken told me there's a bunch of educators and teachers in the audience. I want to start. I'll just lay out just the thesis, and then I'm going to start with what has happened to education. So my argument in brief is that humans had a play-based childhood for millions of years, because that's what mammals do. All mammals play. They have to play to wire up their brains. But that play-based childhood began to fade out in the 1980s in the United States, and it was gone by 2010. And that's because right around 2010 is when the phone-based childhood sweeps in. Our children are now raised largely with a phone at the center of everything. And let's talk about what happened when that change happened. Another way I can summarize my book is by saying we have overprotected our children in the real world, and we have underprotected them online, and both of those are mistakes. So a month or two ago, Derek Thompson, a great data writer, in the data analyst in The Atlantic, had an article when the PISA scores came out. PISA is the one global assessment of how students are doing around the world. 15-year-olds, how are they doing academically? And what Derek pointed out, which people were seeing in this new data, is that scores in math and reading and those were all fairly steady, and then all of a sudden, after 2012, they drop. So that's international. Around the world, our young people are, I shouldn't quite say getting stupider, but they're not learning as much as they would have a few years before. I wonder why. And then Derek didn't include this, but this is another data set we have. This is called the Nation's Report Card, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And here you can track what happened in the United States. From the 70s to 2012, it's slow. I mean, to raise the intelligence or the academic progress of an entire nation is really, really hard. But we were doing it. We were doing it, slow, steady progress in math and reading, until 2012, and then it drops. Now everyone says, oh, COVID was so terrible. Yeah, and it was. And you can see that the drop with COVID is substantial. But the drop didn't begin with COVID. Our students began learning less after 2012. This is when the change happens. So now I'll transition to what my book is more about, which is the mental health. But my point is, across almost any assessment you want to make, Gen Z, born 1996 and later, is doing poorly. And it's very sudden. It happened very suddenly in the early 2010s. So we can see that I first saw this on college campuses. Greg Lukianoff actually was one of the first to spot it. Something was changing about students who arrived in 2014 compared to, say, those who arrived in 2012. Up through 2012, they were all millennials. But as we go on in the decade, you see a number of things rise a little bit. ADHD is up a little bit, learning disability up a tiny bit. But it's really this yellow line, which is psychological disorders. That's what rises fast. That's the big difference between Gen Z and the millennials, is that Gen Z has very high rates of mental illness, especially depression and anxiety. This is data collected from university health systems, and what we see is, so these are US undergraduates with a variety of conditions, and in all the graphs that I show, if you track the data up through 2010, you see nothing. That is, even in the 90s, and especially the 2000s, mental health was not getting worse, and on some measures it was getting a little better. The millennials actually were a little more mentally healthy than Gen X before them. Gen X is 1965 through 1980. But what you see as we go on into the 2010s is this. Everything goes up, but it's especially depression and anxiety. They are now at such high levels. It's just a normal part of being a teenager in the United States. These are college students, but it's just a normal part of being a young person now that you are depressed and anxious. It's not that the majority is, but it's almost. I mean, it's around 30, 40% are depressed and anxious. This graph shows that it's actually just the young people, because as we go on in this period, what you see is that the lines for older people don't really change, but the youngest generation is really where the increase is concentrated. The rise is also gendered in a lot of ways. Boys and girls are doing much worse than they were before, but often the rise is larger for girls. Now, note, in this case, the percentage increase is actually slightly higher for boys, but they start at a much lower level. So they go from about 5% to 12% had a major depression in the last year. A big increase percentage-wise, but you wouldn't say, oh, boys, it's just normal for them to be depressed. They're not. It's 12%. Whereas for girls, it went from 12% up to nearly 30%. Which is a very large portion of our girls have had a major depressive episode in the last year. And I want you to notice, the data for 2022 just came in about 2 months ago, and I was able to add it to the graph. You can kind of see the COVID effect there if you look closely. See? COVID made things a little bit worse, but it really it went right back to the trend line. COVID is trivial compared to whatever happened in the early 2010s. And it's not just that they're saying that they're depressed and anxious. When we look at measures of behavior, this shows it's actually emergency room visits, psychiatric emergency room visits. I'm sorry, not necessarily psychiatric. This is for self-harm. Emergency room visits for self-harm. Again, no trend before 2010, and then after 2010, girls go way, way up, especially preteen girls. The CDC divides the data up into 2 age groups. The younger age group is almost always where you see the biggest percentage increase. Something really, really hit 10 to 14-year-old girls very hard in this country in the early 2010s. And it's not just self-harm, it's also suicide, which boys commit more suicide than girls. They tend to use lethal means such as a gun or a tall building. Girls make many more attempts. But when we look at actual deaths, what we see is a very large and sudden increase. I mean, this is quite astonishing. Between 2012 and 2013, the suicide rate for young teen girls went up 67% in a single year. And it wasn't a blip. It wasn't like an error that it went down the next year. It was the first leg of a rise up to 134% increase. And it's not just us. It's happening in very much the same way in all of the English-speaking countries. This is Britain for self-harm. We see the same pattern. And this is Australia's psychiatric emergency department visits. Again, no trend before 2010, and then afterwards way up for boys and for girls. Same in New Zealand. Similar data from Scandinavia. It's not all over the world. We don't see this in East Asia, but it is all over Northern Europe and the English-speaking countries and North America. Now, why? Why would this pattern be happening in so many countries at the same time? Everyone has a theory. People hit me with all kinds of theories to explain it. And I say, fine, that might work for the United States, but why did that cause girls in Australia to start cutting themselves? It doesn't make any sense. And I think there is really only one theory on the table. I keep waiting for someone to propose another. Nobody has, which is what I call the great rewiring of childhood. It happened in two phases, as I said, the end of the play-based childhood and then the birth of the phone-based childhood. I'll just show you a few more slides, and then I'll invite Tristan up, and we'll continue the conversation. Something I didn't realize until I really got deep into writing the book, you find this graph at Our World in Data. They graph out how adoption of various technologies. And for communication technologies, because they're network issues, there's always a brief period where everyone is getting it. Once some people are getting a telephone, you have a point, everyone now is getting a telephone, that sort of thing. And what we see is that the first wave, the personal computer, so many older people like me remember when you got your first IBM PC, or out here, I guess you would have gotten a Mac, whatever. So that was adopted, and you could do WordStar and other things like that. But it's not until you get dial-up internet that it really becomes useful. And then that rises very fast in the 90s and into the 2000s. And that first wave was wonderful. It was magical. It didn't do anything bad to mental health. It corresponded with the period of the greatest growth in democracy ever. So we were all techno-optimists. This stuff is great, isn't it? But it's this second wave. This is what did in Gen Z, at least in my telling in the book. It was the beginning of social media, which we used to call social networking systems, because it was a way you would just connect and you'd share your profile. Social networking systems are adopted very, very rapidly, even before the smartphone. But once the smartphone comes out as well, those two together are by far the fastest technological adoption in history, although I think maybe ChatGPT might have been faster. I don't know. I don't have the data. But this transformed things just in the blink of an eye. And this is exactly when teen mental health plummets. And also democracy, which may or may, democracy reached a high point around 2011, 2012, and now it's been drifting downward, the number of democracies and their quality. So I'll just to illustrate, childhood used to be, all of older people, I'm sure your fondest memories are not, with your parents, and they're not sitting watching TV. They're probably you're outside playing, you're having adventures. It used to be just for younger people in the audience. If you look at the bottom left picture, it used to just be a thing that you could ride around town in a bicycle with an extraterrestrial in your basket. It's just something, that we did. Whereas now, childhood is basically this. If you're a boy and you want to play video games with your friends, you have to go home alone. You can't go over to your friend's house. You need your headset, your controller, your screen. So childhood now is much more solitary than it ever has been in human history, and the results, I think, are not good. So there are so many different avenues of harm. In fact, in our brief time, I barely have time to just read them. I'll just read them for the audience listening in. Normally, if I had the full hour, I would go through them. I'll just read them. The opportunity cost, kids are on for 9 hours a day, 5 hours a day of which is social media, social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, behavioral addiction. Those affect everyone, boys and girls. Then I have a whole chapter on why social media harms girls more. Girls are more sensitive. Boys and girls are just a little different in their social needs. And so I'll just list them. Visual social comparison, perfectionism, relational aggression. Girls share emotions more than boys, including anxiety and sadness. Girls are more susceptible to sociogenic transmission, especially via TikTok. And girls are more subject to sexual predation and harassment. It's just more part of your daily life online if you're a girl that you're approached by older men with bad intent. But the boy story is a little more complicated, not quite as obvious, but my research associate Zach Rausch and I think we worked it out pretty well, drawing on Richard Reeves' book of Boys and Men, that boys have just been withdrawing from effort in the real world since the 80s, 70s or 80s, and getting lured ever more into the virtual world, where they can get their desires for coalitional violence, that is war and sports, pretend. You can get your desires for that sort of play satisfied in video games, and your desire for sex from pornography. So boys are just retreating from the real world. So we get rising levels of porn addiction. Multiplayer video games take up a huge amount of time. They're great fun. They're incredibly immersive. And so anyway, the point is boys' lives have been upended too. It doesn't show up as much in depression and anxiety. It shows up as just withdrawing from effort in the real world. Boys are just not really doing the things they're not making the efforts and experiencing the failures and setbacks that would strengthen them to grow into men. The proposal, Tristan and I will talk about this, but there's actually a way out, because almost all the parents hate what's going on. All the teachers hate what's going on. All the principals and heads of school hate what's going on. And guess what? Gen Z hates what's going on. They see it. They're not in denial. They really see that they're trapped. And you say, well, why do you waste your life this way? Why don't you just get off? I can't, because everyone else is on. So it's a social dilemma. It's a collective action problem. And so what I'm proposing as the way out is if we all just agree to adopt 4 norms, even if Congress never comes to our aid, even if Congress never does a damn thing to fix the mistakes it made in the 90s that set us up for this, including not just requiring no age verification, but saying, oh, and by the way, you can't sue the companies either. They have blanket protection from lawsuits for what they do to our kids. So even if Congress never fixes the mistake, and I should say, there is real hope for a bill, KOSA, the Kids Online Safety Act. That is the one thing that Congress might do. State legislatures, including Florida and Utah, are actually doing, I think, a great job of trying out approaches that actually will make a difference. But if we just do these 4 norms, if nobody gives their kid a smartphone before high school, just give them a flip phone. That's what the millennials had, and they were fine. Okay, some of you may not think so, but in terms of the mental health data, the millennials were fine. No social media before 16. That's going to be the hardest one to do, and that's where we really could use legislative help. But we can do it even without that. Phone-free schools. This is an absolute. This one is easy. This one is the biggest bang for the buck. This one can be done all over the country by this September. You just buy phone lockers or Yonder pouches, and you need the phone to get to and from school. I understand that. But if anything that can text must be locked up, because if they have anything, including a Chromebook, if they have anything that can text, and some kids are texting, they all have to be texting, because nobody wants to be the only one who didn't know about the thing that happened in 3rd period. So we have to go phone-free schools, and the kids love it once they detox. After a couple of weeks, their brains actually enjoy talking to other kids. And we need much more childhood independence and free play. If we're going to greatly reduce screen time for kids, we have to give them back something fun, something normal, which is play with each other, hanging out with each other, having adventures with each other. So, and just a final note, I teamed up with Eric Schmidt, who has a variety of concerns about AI as a
So we talked about techno-optimism. And just before I continue, I just think it's good to, I don't think any of you are bad parents. I don't think anybody in this room has gone out of their way to try to make their child's life less happy or healthy, to weaken them psychologically. I don't think anybody has any ill intent. I think that we have been bombarded with a technology that has been untested and untried, and it has all of these fancy bells and whistles, but we didn't see what was going on under the surface, and so now we're finally seeing the bad effects of it, and we're saying, whoa. That's what I'm trying to kind of bring to the forefront here. And one of the reasons that we're here is because he talked about this techno-optimism, and it's everywhere. What is techno-optimism? It's basically this fundamental belief. That which comes next technologically will improve our lives. That's the basic premise of the progressive mentality. I'm not talking politics, I'm talking philosophy. The progressive mentality is that that which comes next is going to be an improvement on what came before it. We're basically all progressives in a consumer market, because the consumer market sets us up to believe that that which comes next is going to be better for us because it's improved. It's new and improved, new and improved, new and improved. And so we kind of just get into a purchasing pattern, a consuming pattern, in which we're just looking for the next thing, assuming that the people behind the products have our best intentions, their best intentions at heart. They're looking out for us. And so we, adopt the technology. And what we're finding is that that's wrong. One of the things that is in our educational plan that I just want to read quickly is something from Pope Francis. He wrote in his document Laudato Si that humanity has entered a new era in which our technological prowess has brought us to a crossroads. We are the beneficiaries of 2 centuries of enormous waves of change: steam engines, railways, the telegraph, electricity, automobiles, airplanes, chemical industries, modern medicine, information technology, and more recently, the digital revolution, robotics, biotechnologies, and nanotechnologies. It is right to rejoice in these advances and to be excited by the immense possibilities which they continue to open up before us. For science and technology are wonderful products of a God-given creativity. The modification of nature for useful purposes has distinguished the human family from the beginning. Technology itself expresses the inner tension that impels man gradually to overcome material limitations. He goes on to say, however, that the basic problem is the way that humanity has taken up technology and its development according to an undifferentiated and one-dimensional paradigm. This paradigm exalts the concept of a subject who, using logical and rational procedures, progressively approaches and gains control over an external object. This subject makes every effort to establish the scientific and experimental method, which in itself is already a technique of possession, mastery, and transformation. It is as if the subject were to find itself in the presence of something formless, completely open to manipulation. Men and women have constantly intervened in nature, but for a long time this meant being in tune with and respecting the possibilities offered by the things themselves. It was a matter of receiving what nature itself allowed, as if from its own hand. Now, by contrast, we are the ones to lay our hands on things, attempting to extract everything possible from them while frequently ignoring or forgetting the reality in front of us. Human beings and material objects no longer extend a friendly hand to one another. The relationship has become confrontational. I think he's dead right. I think that we have come to a place now where technology is so powerful that we are forgetting very quickly what human nature is. What the deep, innate, God-given wisdom written into our flesh is. And as we become increasingly detached from our own human nature, we become increasingly susceptible to manipulation and interventions that, while they might look good and promising, are insidious to the actual things that are necessary for us to become happy, healthy, and holy, which is the whole point. And so I think we found something here that we literally need to just reject. That's going to be kind of my point. He begins his book by doing a great thought experiment about sending your kids to Mars. He says, suppose that when your first child turned 10, a visionary billionaire whom you've never met chose her to join the first permanent human settlement on Mars. Her academic performance, plus an analysis of her genome, which you don't remember giving consent for, clinched her a spot. Unbeknownst to you, she had signed herself up for the mission because she was allowed to. What he basically is saying is that when we gave our kids smartphones and access to all that is on them, we were sending them to Mars without knowing the effects that would come from it and trusting the billionaire who was selling it to us that he had our best intentions at heart. We know that Steve Jobs would not send his kids to a school that used iPads, for example. Silicon Valley is one of the most prominent places in the country for tech-free schools. Explain that. They know what's going on, and they know the dangers that are associated with it if you use it in a way that is not deliberate, intentional, and controlled. And so when it comes down to Steve Jobs and what he wants for his kids, it's not iPads. That should remind us of what we're talking about here. The U.S. Surgeon General just came out with a call for, on packs of cigarettes. Maybe you don't, because the campaign for smoking cessation has been very effective, but they all have a Surgeon General's warning on it. Smoking may cause cancer, whatever. If you go to Italy, where I lived for years, they don't just have a warning on it, they have the most hideous picture of a cancerous mouth or somebody without their jaw or a tracheotomy or something that they can come up with so that every time you open that pack of cigarettes, you're like, is it worth it? Is that going to happen to me? He's asking for that on social media. Chapter 1 of the book is entitled The Surge of Suffering, and that's where he went through all of the things that he went through in the video that we just watched. We're not going to repeat that, okay? Chapter 2 talks about what children need to do in childhood. So, again, getting back to nature, what are the needs that our human nature has to grow up in a healthy fashion, to flourish as a human being? And there's some things that he talks about. He says, in this chapter, Dr. Haidt showed how human childhood is very different from that of any other species. Why? Because our slow growth childhoods facilitate cultural learning, positioning childhood as an apprenticeship to acquire skills vital for cultural success. He emphasizes the role of free play, particularly unsupervised, risky free play, in cultivating and internalizing this cultural knowledge. But play-based childhoods were replaced by phone-based childhoods in the early 2010s as children and adolescents moved their social lives and free time largely onto internet-connected devices, stunting their development. So the 5 features of childhood development that he talks about, one is slow growth, okay? And I'm not going to entirely get into that, but children's brains grow to 90% of full size by age 5, but then they take a long time to configure themselves, and that this is where the slow growth is happening for cultural learning. And then when they hit puberty again, they really ramp up again in terms of rewiring. A quote that I thought was great because he talks about free play. He says, physical play outdoors and with other children of mixed ages is the healthiest, most natural, most beneficial sort of play. Play with some degree of physical risk is essential because it teaches children how to look after themselves and each other. Experience, not information, is the key to emotional development. It is unsupervised child-led play where children best learn to tolerate emotions, take turns, resolve conflicts, and play fair. Children are intrinsically motivated to acquire these skills because they want to be included in the play group and keep the fun thing going. Third, attunement. So attunement is really about, what would we call it? Emotional intelligence, learning how to act in the presence of others, right? Learning how to read visual cues, the cues that come from the tone of voice, right? This is the wonder and the amazement of interpersonal communication versus anything mediated by a digital screen outside of FaceTime, which is better than most, okay? Because it's synchronous and you can see the person, right? But what we need is embodied, because we are bodies. We're not brains in a vat, right? Anthropologically, philosophically, we are not just brains in a vat. We are our bodies, and our bodies mediate reality to us. And so when I cut myself off from a source of experience as an embodied person for huge portions of my day, it's not the same kind of experience. My body's not getting the same kind of stimulation that teaches me how to react and act in the real world, okay? So attunement, super important for learning how to relate and bond pairs, groups, and whole communities. Children are born with 2 innate learning programs that help them to acquire their local culture. The first is conformist bias, which motivates them to copy whatever seems to be most common, and then prestige bias motivates them to copy whoever seems to be the most accomplished and prestigious. Social media platforms, which are engineered for engagement, hijack social learning and drown out the culture of one's family and local community while locking children's eyes onto influencers of questionable value. I think that if any of you parents in here took some time on your child's TikTok app with the algorithm built for them and saw what kind of influencers, what kind of people with massive followings that are getting all of the likes that are showing up everywhere and feeding those things into your child's memory, imagination as what is normal. If you saw what was going on there, you would be horrified by the kinds of people that are influencing our kids online, and it's happening all of the time. They're not learning anything on TikTok other than what is socially acceptable and normal. So the question is, who do you want raising your kids? Who do you want to be the norm? You? Or some paid influencer for longer eyelashes for 12-year-olds? Seriously. Like, who do you want raising your kids? Because they're spending 9 hours a day on these devices, way more time than they're spending with you. Social learning occurs through childhood, and puberty is a huge part of this. It's a sensitive period from age 9 to 15, and what we learn during that period is very influential for how we come out as adults. Okay, next slide. Teens who meet up with their friends almost every day has gone down. Teens who meet up with their friends daily, boys and girls, segmented, got down considerably after the phone in 2010 with the back-facing camera. Chapter 3, discover mode and the need for risky play. One of the things that we want to do is we want to, in a way that is going to, we don't know how it's going to work exactly, but we want to provide our kids more opportunities for lightly supervised or unsupervised risky play. And this is a parental thing, too. Like, just from a school's perspective, when mom gets a phone call that Johnny, got hurt on the playground, that's never a great phone call to make. And moms are, rightly concerned about the health of their children. One of the things that came up so importantly, though, I think in this chapter, is just how the more we try to protect our kids from all dangers, from all harms, all setbacks, all injuries, the more likely it is that when that injury comes to find them, it's not going to be a bruise, it's going to be a broken bone. Okay? And we want bruised children because they are going to become more resilient, more anti-fragile, and more capable of facing danger in the world and not retreating from it. Okay, so he talks about discover mode and defend mode. Okay, we need both. Fear is not bad, but it needs to be in its proper place. So he talks about these two systems. The behavioral activation system turns on when you detect opportunities, such as suddenly coming across a tree full of ripe cherries. When you and your group are hungry, you're flooded with positive emotions and shared excitement. Your mouth may begin to water and everyone's ready to go. This is discover mode. Yes, I'm excited about reality. I'm ready to go into it, right? The behavioral inhibition system, in contrast, turns on when threats are detected, such as hearing a leopard roar nearby as you're picking those cherries. You all stop what you're doing. Your appetite is suppressed as your body floods with stress hormones, and your thinking turns entirely to identifying the threat and finding ways to escape it. Let's call this defend mode. For people with chronic anxiety, defend mode is chronically activated. I'm always worried about the thing in the background that's coming for me. One of the things that we need to recognize with social media for teenage girls in a particular way is this, I think this is, and he makes this argument, this is one of the reasons that Instagram and social media is so bad for our teenage girls, because they are super worried about what the public is saying about them and their pictures and their profiles out there when they're not paying attention, or even when they are. They're living constantly in fear of what is being said by my peers online when I'm not online. And so the stress hormone of just not knowing what's going on Snapchat or Instagram is a cause of higher cortisol levels and stress. Okay. Look at the self-reported disabilities of U.S. college freshmen. I mean, that's just crazy. Here's the good news. Our kids are anti-fragile. Okay, this is a term coined by Nassim Taleb in a book, Anti-Fragile, Things That Gain from Disorder, in 2012. And so he makes three basic distinctions. I think it's a he, I don't know actually. Some things like wine glasses are fragile. We protect them because they can't, if you knock them down, they break easily, okay? Some things are resilient, such as plastic cups, but they're just resilient. They're just kind of dumbly resilient. They just have a form that's impervious to feeling, right? So you can throw it on the floor, and it doesn't hurt it, but it doesn't get stronger. But then there's organic things, like most trees, and he talks about how trees with their root systems, if you grow a tree in an environment that doesn't have wind, the root system is not forced to resist against the wind, and so then when you take that thing out or it grows to full stature, it falls over. Anti-fragile things have built-in resilience mechanisms, which means that which doesn't kill me actually makes me stronger if it's in a short dose, and it's not chronic and over a long period of time, right? So this is my best friend today is the first person who hit me in the face on the playground. I survived it. We're best friends today. I was holding his hat because I'm tall and he was short. He was a wrestler. Above my head, somebody gave it to me. I wasn't even the one who stole it. But I thought, I'm going to hold this up here. It's going to make me cool. And he jumps off the ground and hits me right in the face. That was my first experience of being punched in the face by reality. It didn't make me weaker. It made me stronger. That's just one example of all of the ways that what he's asking us to do as parents is to pull back from the helicopter parenting and the safetyism and say, I want you to fail when it's good for you to fail. Because then you're going to be more resilient as a result of it, right? I want you to get in trouble now, feel what that is like a little bit before you're in juvie, right? This kind of approach to, I want you to feel your limitations as a human being, even when they hurt a little bit, because it's better for you to hurt a little bit than to hurt a lot. Okay? So we need to, one of the things that I think was great in this, I quote, thrilling experiences have anti-phobic effects. Thrilling experiences have anti-phobic effects. That's just a great thing to keep in mind, right? As children become more competent, they become increasingly more intrigued by some of the things that had frightened them. Risky play is defined as thrilling and exciting forms of play that involve risk of physical injury. There are 6 kinds of risks that kids look for when given freedom to do so. Heights, high speed, dangerous tools, dangerous elements, rough and tumble play, and disappearing. Well-intentioned parents who try to raise their children in a bubble of satisfaction, protected from frustration, consequences, and negative emotions, may be harming their children. They may be blocking the development of competence, self-control, frustration tolerance, and emotional self-management. Several studies find that such coddling or helicopter parenting is correlated with later anxiety disorders, low self-efficacy, and difficulty adjusting to college. So my favorite quote of the book is this: keep them as safe as necessary, not as safe as possible. Let me say that again. Keep them as safe as necessary, not as safe as possible. I think if we all made that a motto, our kids would be growing. Okay? So push back against safetyism. The highest thing in life is not to be safe. It's not the most important thing in life. There are other things that are greater goods than being safe. There are greater things in life than being locked in your room. The adventure of life requires us to be vulnerable and courageous in the pursuit of high and noble things. One of my favorite movies, Hacksaw Ridge, wonderful movie about a gentleman who is a conscientious objector. So he became the medic for a World War II, what was the battle? Hacksaw Ridge, obviously. Okay, the battle at Hacksaw Ridge. And his thing was, I'm going to save as many guys as I possibly can. Every time he went back knowing that he could lose his life. But there was something greater than living for him. And we need to reclaim that as Americans. There are things worth living for that are also worth dying for. So we want to push back. So in a very real way, what do I want to do? I want to bring back snowball fights. I want to bring it back, but I don't want to get called by mom when Johnny gets hit with a snowball and he's crying. You don't want your kid playing snowball fight? That's fine. That's your prerogative. But I want to bring them back. I want to bring back opportunities for kids to do the things that we're asking for. Okay. Chapter 4, and I'm getting done here. I'm not going to get really into chapter 4, but basically there's this idea that we need to scaffold the amount of freedom and responsibility both together, that we give to our kids, especially in puberty, so that they are taking on more freedom but also more responsibility. Both of those things together, and we need to do it in such a way that really stretches them but doesn't drown them. I just think back, we talk about men don't mature till they're 25 years old. It's like, okay, maybe that's because we're not forcing them to do things. My grandfather left home at 14 years old to go to the West Coast to work on bridges in order to send money home so that his family could eat. The man was amazing. Nobody said, well, you're only 14. They said, all right, you think you can do this? Get out there. Didn't crush him. It made him into a tremendously magnanimous, good man. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a family. I'm not going to name them because they'll get embarrassed. Their kids are in elementary school, and they're running a skid steer already. Why not? Oh, sorry, I'm getting preachy. I'm sorry. I'm part of this. I'm part of the problem, though, right? Because we want control as adults. We want control, and I don't want to be sued. If I'm honest, one of the reasons that rules in schools just get to be more and more and more is because lawsuits are one of the biggest fears that we have as a school. Well, if we leave kids unsupervised for a moment and something happens to them, they're going to sue us for negligence. We should have been supervising. That's how it works. There's a rationality to it, But we have to have a culture that says, no, that's basically how it goes. Tough thing for Johnny, but, he learned from it. Okay, I'm not promoting any of these things, but I'm also saying, it is very interesting that adult-like behaviors that seniors, so we're saying you can sign up for the draft, right? You can sign up for the draft, you can go die for your country, but there's these behaviors that are more adult-like. This is Jonathan's slide, not mine. I'm not making a moral evaluation of it. I'm just saying that kids are not pushing out into the limits of their freedom in the real world as much as they used to. It's much more online, okay? So he talks about building a ladder from childhood to adulthood, age 6, the age of family responsibility. Age 8, the age of local freedom. Age 10, the age of roaming. I remember riding my bike by myself alone as a, 10, 11-year-old across town in Dickinson all day without a cell phone to go to the baseball diamonds for the day. My parents let me do that. I would just leave. And then they would say, you got to be back by supper time. Or if you're not back by noon, I'm going to be calling to see where you're at. I'm going to call your parents' houses or the friends of your parents. So there was a way in which, I just remember having so much freedom as a child to, just get out of the house. And I think that's one of the things that he's saying is, we're way overprotecting our kids in the real world and underprotecting them online. And if you talk to law enforcement officers, the amount of predation that's happening online is way more than that's happening outside of that. It all starts online. The predators are online. That's where they are. Okay? Chapter 5, the 4 foundational harms. He kind of talked about this. I'm going to skip because I'm getting long. Daily average time with friends, way down. Sleep deprivation, okay? You need to lock your kid's screen up at night. You need to take it from them because they're not sleeping, okay? They're not sleeping. I'll tell you a quick story about how addictive video games are for boys and social media is for girls. I'll use the video game thing. My cousin had his in-laws over. Nobody in this room knows these people, so don't worry about this. It's not a confession thing. He had his in-laws over, cousins. Cousins were there, gaming, all day. They found their 13-year-old in the shower at 3 a.m. with his gaming system, playing his games. Their child was so immersed in the game that he peed his pants rather than pause the video game. That gives you an idea of how addictive these immersive experiences can be. It becomes totally irrational. So one of the things that we have to do is you got to check your device in. There's like literally no reason for you to have your phone after 8 o'clock. The only things that I, as an administrator, have dealt with are problems with kids doing social media in the middle of the night. Like, no. Facebook's desire to form addiction. Father Wolf talked a lot about this last year with the habit loop, okay? These people are engineering their software and their devices to keep your attention. Why? Profit motive. Why does Google, the free search engine, the free maps, the free world, all of that, why does Google want your attention? Because your attention gives them data about you. That data is then sold for ads to retailers, whoever, so that they can target you as a consumer, and then they can charge more for the better data, right? That's what it's about. It's about your attention. It's about getting all the information that they can get about you so that they can, and the way to do that is to keep you online as much as possible, okay? This creates this habit loop, this trigger, action, valuable, reward, investment. It's the same thing that happens with gambling, okay? And this is leading to the addictive part of what our kids are going through. So if you take your phone away from your child, they're going to probably be irritable, maybe seriously angry at you for some time. If I'm an alcoholic and you take my alcohol away from me, I'm going to go through a withdrawal. That withdrawal is going to make me irritable, angry, and horrible to be around for a while. It's the sign of addiction. The same thing happens to our kids. We take the thing away, they throw the temper tantrum, we're like, fine, have it back. It's like, no, I actually need that forever because it makes you bad, right? Chapter 11, chapter 12, what can schools and parents do? I'm wrapping up, okay? This is the rubber hits the road. This is what I'm asking. This is what I'm begging. This is what I believe we can do for the sake of our kids, okay? What can schools do? Great Polynesian expression. Standing on a whale, fishing for minnows. We're looking for all of these little things to get incremental improvements in student behavior during school, more engagement in the classroom, whatever. We're standing on the whale, okay? And the whale is the cell phone. We've had a phone-free school policy for a while, right? We've been trying it. You know what happens? Kids hide their phones. I kid you not. Can't believe it. They hide their phones, and they go into the bathroom for extended periods of time to try to check Snapchat, Instagram, whatever else they're doing. Because their mind is already there. That's where they're living. They're not living in the classroom. They're living online even when they're in the classroom, okay? So what do we need to do? We need to make school a phone-free environment. That means from 8 o'clock in the morning until 3:17 p.m., if you're in this building, you don't have access to your phone. We just need to eliminate that issue, okay? It's important that parents say, I want that. If parents aren't behind this, it won't work. Parents need to say, I agree, I'm behind you, Father Nelson. I will not text my child during the day. I will call the office if I need an immediate response, and they will get the message to them. We need the parents, if we call them and say, Johnny, he forgot his phone for 3 days now. Is he just leaving it at home? Mom's like, no, I texted him right before school. Oh, because he told us he forgot his phone. Johnny, where's the phone? Well, I didn't want to put it away. Okay, we're going to need you to put the phone away in the lockable pouch, which is my proposal, so that you don't have access to it during the day, so that you can focus on your friends, the real people in front of you, and schoolwork. Everybody else is doing it. The social dilemma is a huge part of this, right? He said it at the beginning. Everybody is tied into this thing, and it's like, well, I don't want to be the first one out because then I'm out. I need everybody out so that they're actually in. That's what I need. So I'm begging for support for this. We don't have any policies finalized yet at the board level, but that's what I'm going to be asking for. Most schools say that they ban phones, but that typically means only that students must not use their phones during class. This is an ineffective policy because it incentivizes students to hide their phone use during class and increasing their phone use after class, which makes it harder for them to form friendships with the kids around them, okay? So a phone-free school day. No cell phone or smartwatch access while in school. Yonder pouch, which we're going to talk about in a second, assigned to each student. Phones are turned off or put on airplane mode and locked in the pouch at the beginning of the day. Prayer, pledge, dress code check, phone pouch. Locking them away, okay? They are unlocked at the end of the day or when checking out of school. So I'm leaving for open campus lunch, and I want my phone. So there's an unlocking mechanism that you can come and unlock your pouch, and then there's a signing in protocol to make sure that you put your phone back in your pouch when you're back in class, okay? I'm going to Minot High for 2 periods, okay? If you want your phone at that time, you got to leave the pouch at the office so that we know that the pouch is here. You have your phone. When you sign back in, it goes into the pouch, and then you have your phone back, okay? Pouches are kept in the office while student is out of the building during school hours. A damaged or lost pouch will be charged to parents $30 a pouch. Okay, so we buy them the original pouch. They're heavy duty. It shouldn't be an issue unless you're trying to open the pouch. Okay, so that's the Yonder pouch. Okay, that's what they kind of look like. 1,200 schools have already done this across the country. 86% saw a positive impact in student safety and wellness. 84% saw a positive change in student engagement. 72% saw a positive change in student behavior. 68% saw a positive change in academic performance. We just had our video call with the Yonder pouch person, and we can't get our pouches until beginning of September because there are so many schools that are doing this that they can't keep up with the supply chain right now. Jonathan Haidt's book is changing things. LA School District adopted a phone-free school policy. Virginia just mandated that all schools in Virginia develop a phone-free school policy at the board level. West Hope just developed a lock your phone in the box phone policy. I think this is where we need to go, okay? The second part of this that we don't have any control over as a school, but I think is the other side of the coin and very important is this. We talked about, for the last half an hour, 45 minutes, almost an hour, the digital rewiring of childhood. It's not just phones in school, okay? I want you to think about this as the bigger issue of the change that the phone has made to how childhood looks for kids, especially when all of the interactions are facilitated through the phone, all of the social media stuff that's going on as the way to communicate, okay? I am proposing that parents voluntarily, as many as we can get involved, sign on to the Virtue Tech Pledge for Bishop Ryan, which says this: in order to address the challenges that children face as a result of the digital rewiring of childhood, I, parent, at Bishop Ryan Catholic School, pledge to adhere to the following guidance with regard to my child's access to and interface with technology. First, I will not allow my child to have a smartphone until grade 9. A smartphone is defined as a phone with internet browsing capability and the ability to download apps. Jonathan Haidt's very clear that that device is the problem. It's the bearer of the problem, okay? Before bedtime, my children will check in their devices. Sleep deprivation is a huge issue with our kids. It's so important for them to get 8 hours of sleep in order for them to function properly, grow properly, come to school not stressed, not tired, happy. And I don't know about any of you, but I would wager to guess that all of us have had this experience. I sit down at the end of the day for a little breather. Maybe I have a Diet Coke, something to sip on, some peanut M&Ms. And I turn on YouTube, my go-to. Little podcast, little Joe Rogan, little whatever, PBD, whatever. And an hour and a half later, I'm like, oh, it's 11:30. I got to get up in 6 hours. That's happening to everybody. Okay? You don't have to be ashamed about it. Just have to acknowledge it. Your children need sleep more than you do. Okay? So as the adults, we need to say, you know what? I'm just going to take care of that for you. Everybody, there's a phone charging station in the kitchen or in our bedroom. You just bring your phone, 8 o'clock, plug it in, it's charged, ready for you to go in the morning. We'll take care of it. That's it. Okay? I will not allow my children to have social media accounts until junior year. This is the one that is going to be really difficult to do. Why? Because if 10% of the kids don't have social media, right, they're the ones that are on the outside. Because that's how the kids are doing the things. Everybody's snapping everybody. And I'm not part of that. But nobody wants to be the one to say, like, yeah, Mom, Dad, I'm going to voluntarily give up Snapchat. Very few kids are going to do that. We've had some. We've actually had some as a response to having time with their friends in which they didn't have access to their phones, the Rome pilgrimage, the March for Life, where they come back and they're like, you know what? I'm done. I don't want it anymore. My life was better without it. But that takes an enormous amount of courage for a 14 or a 15 or a 16-year-old to do. It's much easier for us to be the adults in the room to say, you know what? You can hate me for it now. You're going to love me for it later, but you don't have access to Snapchat anymore. Text your friends. Call them. That's what we did. We survived. You know what? You're a 14-year-old girl. You're really beautiful. You don't know that yet. You don't get to go on Instagram. I love you as your father enough to not let you go on Instagram because I know what it does to you. Who in here who has a teenage daughter would say, yep, I'm okay with my daughter being the 30% that has a major depressive episode next year? Nobody! Nobody says that. And yet when we allow our kids to do this, knowing what we know now, that's what we're saying. And so my plea is to say, we're done. I'm taking care of my children. I don't care if they hate me right now. They're not on Instagram anymore. They're not on TikTok anymore. It's not making them a better human being. That's what we need. The fathers and the mothers to say, I'm the adult, and you don't get a choice in this. That's what I'm asking. So, does anybody have any questions at all? I'm going to leave these here. These are the Virtue Tech pledges. I want you to take one. I want you to think about your daughter's mental health. I want you to think about your son's mental health. I'm going to give you one more statistic. 500,000 years. Anybody have any idea what that is? What that number refers to? 500,000 years. That's how much pornography is on Pornhub. I'm just going to be totally honest because I haven't had a filter all night. If you allow your teenage boy to have unfettered internet access, you are setting them up for an addiction to pornography. That addiction to pornography is going to make it much less likely that they pursue an actual woman. That is going to lead to a lack of confidence. That is going to lead to a less likely chance that they have a functional marriage that is healthy, romantic, capable of doing what their vocation is supposed to be as a husband and a father. It's real. The first introduction to hardcore pornography is below the age of 11. It's so visually stimulating. This isn't dad's Playboy or uncle's Playboy under the bed or whatever. This isn't, not that that's good. I'm not saying that that's good. I'm saying that this is hardcore, high-definition pornography that is melting the prefrontal cortex of your boy's brain. You can look it up. What a porn addict's brain looks like in its prefrontal cortex, which is where your executive function comes from, your ability to act prudently, your ability to plan and get things done. Where that's at is the same as a heroin addict. Okay? So if you want to give your kid access to a hypodermic needle and some fentanyl, just let them search Pornhub. And it's not that your kid's a bad kid. It's that the woman is the most beautiful thing in the world. Every normal teenage boy wants to see a naked girl. That's normal. That's like Adam and Eve stuff, right? It's not bad. The problem is that this thing that we're dealing with is so dangerous and so pervasive, and nobody wants to talk about it because it's shameful, but we have to be the grown-ups and be like, you know what, I'm just not letting you do that. I'm not giving you access to it. Okay? Because I want you to be healthy, happy, and holy. I want you to have a good marriage in the future. It's actually affecting marriages. I can tell you as a priest. I'm not making this up to scare you. I'm scaring you because it's real. Right? So as the adults, we're just going to say, yeah, no more phones for you with internet access, unfettered, at 14 years old. Like, we're just not doing it. Right? So, okay, soapbox. I'm off the soapbox. I hope that everybody will sign this pledge for the sake of our kids. Any questions?